Greetings, mortals! It is I, Remortis, coming at you with a build guide for Age of Wonders 4. With the recent DLC and surge of new players, I figured it'd be a good time to present some different builds that I've updated from my past, as well as some new ones, especially with all these new updates, changes, and the DLCs that were added. In particular, I'll be starting off with some themes based off the Ravnica guilds from Magic the Gathering, beginning with the Gruul Clans, who represent brute strength, raiding and unleashing that inner beast, which will be a barbarian build that focuses on both chaos and nature affinities. This is a pretty straightforward build. We're aiming to just buff ourselves up and hit really hard. Although there are plenty of nuances to cater to your liking, and I'll provide different options to pick here and there when the time arises. But enough of all this. Let's just get right into it, shall we? Before we begin, we'll just knock out a quick guide for those of you who just want the quick answers on knowing what to pick, and feel free to stick around if you'd like to see a more detailed version of the guide. So starting off, for our form, doesn't really matter what you pick. For traits, pick up Strong, Cheerful, and Overwhelm tactics. Cheerful and Overwhelm tactics will give you more critical hit chances because barbarians get extra damage whenever they crit from savage strikes, and pick up Strong just to get flat extra damage to your physical attacks from both melee and ranged. For society traits, go ahead and pick up Ruthless Raiders or pick up the Ritualistic Cannibals, and then pick up Fabled Hunters. Fabled Hunters is a must-have, and then alternate between Ruthless Raiders or Ritualistic Cannibals. Cannibals is probably better overall, but pick whatever you desire the most. And for tomes, start off with Tome of the Horde, simply for the Houndmaster, as well as the Summoner Regulars and Spawnkin if you want to go with a wide build. Also, you get a nice forester improvement here. For your second tier 1 tome, you want to pick up Tome of the Beast, simply for animal kinship to combo with your Houndmasters, and then you're going to pick up Summon Wild Animal, as well as Wild Speaker, and Mark as Prey. And you get another lovely province building here. Moving on to tier 2, there aren't too many tomes that really stand out that you must have. However, Tome of the Shades, one of the new tomes from Way of War, provides some interesting ways to deal extra damage and potentially blinding your enemies. It doesn't have the most synergy with the build, however it is pretty solid nonetheless. You get a nice defensive thing here from Living Shadows, and not only that, you'll also get a Materium and Shadow Affinity, which you wouldn't otherwise get in your build, to help you get some of those early Empire choices that are really good from Materium and Shadow. Otherwise, you can go back and pick some tier 1 tomes that you missed before, such as Tome of Pyromancy to get Searing Blades or Fiery Arrows to give extra fire damage to your melee and range attacks, and getting yet another Forester building. So for some off-brand ones you can also pick from tier 1, you can pick Tome of Faith to get extra healing and make some of your mediocre support units actually be useful healers, or you can also pick the new Tome of Discipline to get Mantra of Purification to get some healing and dispels, as well as getting Empowered Strikes for stuns on your multi-hit characters, and getting the Monks. But moving on to tier 3, we would definitely want to get 2 tomes here. We're going to be getting Tome of Devastation simply for Warbreeds. Warbreeds smash. Warbreeds hit really good. Really all you're here for is just Warbreed and Flameburst weapons. Our other tier 3 tome will be Tome of Vigor, the Nature Tree. We'll be picking up Super Growth if you did not go with the wide version of Spawnkin, picking up Empowered Beasts, as well as Summon Greater Animal and Totem of Wild. You can probably live without Totem of Wild. The other 3 are must-haves. Moving on to tier 4, we have the Tome of Demon Gate, where you can get Demonkin transformation, and getting the Demon Gate province enhancement, so we can just make teleporters throughout our empire to get our units across the map and to the front lines. And for tier 5, we went with Tome of the Chaos Lord, simply for a win condition. Typically, by the time you get to tier 3 and tier 4 tomes, the game is pretty much won, or damn near close to it. Alright, and that is the quick guide. Feel free to stick around to get a more detailed version of this guide. Otherwise, please like, comment, and subscribe for more guides like these. And I'll see you in the next video. Now, on to the rest of the guide. In Magic, the colors of the Gruul clans are red and green, which is all about hitting things hard with big creatures, or creatures that get really big, or in other words, me smash! So naturally, we'll be playing as barbarians. But before we look into the racial and society traits, let's go ahead and take a look at what the barbarian has to offer. So barbarians are all about aggro and war, and they have a much higher food and drought production, so you're going to be able to grow taller and be able to produce units a lot faster. One of their main features is called Savage Strikes, which will deal extra blight damage whenever you critically hit. And beyond that, we also get the Ritual of Alacrity, which allows us to heal our units a little bit better so they can keep on going. So obviously, we were going to be growing really tall and be able to pump units out really quickly, And then we'll also want to try to get as many critical hits as possible so we can get all that extra goody blight damage. So moving back to our racial traits, you can pick whatever form you desire, but I really like the idea of orcs, even though there aren't too many orcs in the Gruul clans, but we'll worry about that at a later time. Eventually, however, or rather pretty soon, there will be a giant DLC, which will be much more suitable for this race. But anyways, pick whatever form you desire, but for the traits, there are plenty of really good options to choose from. As you can see here, I currently have selected as Strong, Pack Tactics, and Cheerful. Strong is a natural fit because you just do extra damage. Easy peasy. Pack Tactics, however, you can swap in and out as you so desire. As you can see here, the more units you have to surround your enemies with, the more damage you'll end up doing, and it's just a flat damage increase. Other strong candidates you might want to consider picking up would be Ferocious, although I don't really value this too much because there's so many ways to cancel people's retaliation, but it's still good nonetheless. Fast recuperation is always handy if you want to be able to keep on getting your units nice and healthy out there. But if you build enough outposts, you can heal yourself pretty quickly. So you don't really need to prioritize this as you do on other factions. Another obvious option to pick up would be Overwhelm Tactics, which you can take out for Pack Tactics because they're mutually exclusive anyways. And this will just give you a flat 20% crit chance whenever you're standing next to each other. Another really good choice that you might consider that I really strongly suggest on every faction is the Light-Footed, which will allow you to move through your friendly units. Eventually, this won't matter too much depending on what kind of transformations you take, but Light-Footed is an amazing trait to have, so I would highly encourage that. And then we took Cheerful so we can get higher morale, which will end up being more critical hit chance as well. So moving on to society traits, this is where things get really nuanced, as there are plenty of different options you can pick for the Gruul Clans theme. Starting off with our chaos traits, the most obvious choice is Ruthless Raiders. This is a really good talent to have for this build, as anytime you win a combat, you gain gold and drafts based on the tier of units you killed, so you can really pump out more units a lot quicker, as well as by building upgrades and even more units. Really strong choice to have. Another fantastic option is Ritual Cannibals, one of my other favorite traits in the game. It'll allow you to gain the corpse eating ability in the middle of combat, which will allow your units to get free healing whenever things die, whether it's your allies or enemies. This is actually really good on this build because the Barbarians as a faction and culture and most of their builds typically lack a lot of healing, so getting that extra healing is really nice. Not to mention, anytime you slay enemies in combat, you'll gain bonus mana and food per tier. Similarly to how Ruthless Raiders will give us extra gold and draft, we'll get extra food and mana, which could allow us to grow our cities a lot quicker. And then we also don't have to worry too much about getting mana generation, since we're not going to have a lot of that anyways. So Ritual Cannibals is really good, as is Ruthless Raiders. Prolific Swarmers is also a really good one too, especially if you're going to be spamming a tons of tier 1 units. You get an additional +1 rank. You also start with an extra tier 1 unit, and then on top of that, all your units will cost 20% less as long as they're not from Magic Origins. And typically we're going to have a ton of units, so that extra upkeep cost is going to be pretty nice. And beyond that, our cities will take less food to get more population, so we can grow much quicker. Moving on to one of my favorite talents in the entire game is Fabled Hunters. You'll gain 75% resources from clearing infestations, ancient wonders, and resource nodes, which is generally going to be a good portion of the early and mid game. And you'll just get a lot more resources, and then on top of that, you'll get a little extra healing per turn, which is going to be fantastic since we're going to be playing as a champion hero to get even more healing per world turn. And beyond that, we also get an extra range unit, which is going to be really handy, especially if you're playing on brutal difficulties where you start off with less units. So really, for this build, we're going to be going with Fabled Hunters, and then either your choice of Ritual Cannibals, Ruthless Raiders, or Prolific Swarmers. You can't go wrong with any of these options. I'll probably go with Ritual Cannibals for now, or Ruthless Raiders, whichever one you feel is more on theme for your build. Before we go over the tomes and units, let's go ahead and take a look at our champion here. So without a doubt, we're playing as Gruul here, and we are going to be playing as a champion. Now, with the most recent patch, we got a hero rework, so champions are actually really, really strong. I think they might be even stronger in Wizard Kings in some case, but it's definitely the case here. So, before we go into the build itself, I want to note that most of the leaders of the Gruul clans are Cyclopses and Ogres, such as this one I named after one of the leaders called Rurik Thar. Obviously right here we're an Orc, but with the new Giant Kings DLC that will be coming out fairly soon, we'll probably switch over to one of those leaders once they become available. But until then, let's go ahead and take a look at each class that we might consider playing as for our main character. So Gruul is all about hitting hard and, well, hitting harder, I should say. So naturally, we're going to be a warrior for our main hero. Now, as you can see here, I have the Slayer Sword selected because A, that looks badass and orky, does it not? But it also has an amazing passive here called Fatal Strikes. Damage increases as the target loses health up to 50%. And then when you crit, it does even more damage. It's just a really nice finisher. Playing as a warrior is a lot of fun because you can get some really good hits and you can dish out quite a bit of damage. And you can actually get considerably tanky depending on how you build your character. But I want to caveat, though, that you are going to be extremely vulnerable to magic spells. So whenever you can, you want to try to get equipment that will increase your resistances and such, but we'll get to that in a moment. So obviously, customize your character however you want. If you don't have access to the Slayer Sword from unlocking that in the Pantheon, you could easily go with the Great Axe and you'll be just fine. As for our ruler ambitions, there are so many good choices to pick for our character. So I went here with the Raider. Win a combat in enemy territory, and you'll get resourceful, which will just let us get HP regen no matter where we are on the map, which is always going to be nice. And pillaging will just give us a little bit of renown as well. Some other ones you might want to consider is the Challenger. Win a combat against an army with 500 more power than you, and you'll get Aggressive Tactician, which will give you Hastened, which makes it so you have very fast movement, and an additional retaliation attack. And I really love getting extra retaliation attacks, even though they can be countered pretty easily. Crusader is also a really good one to pick up. It'll make, once we kill a undead or fiend of tier 4 or higher in combat, we'll be able to get Preacher, which will make our units cost less and also deal a little bit of extra spirit damage, which could be pretty nice. Otherwise, we can go with the Duelist, which will, if we slay rulers and other heroes, we'll be able to eventually get the Duelist perk itself, which will deal extra damage to heroes and also will give you resistance and defense against them, which is pretty nice. Although, killing off heroes isn't too much of a challenge because no matter how tanky they can try to be, they're still going to be really squishy compared to a lot of your units, especially after you get a lot of transformations. But Duelist is pretty thematic for this character. Otherwise, you can also go with Glory Seeker. This is probably another really good one to pick up, especially when you start fighting tougher foes, as the higher ranks they have, not just their tier, but their experience, you'll be able to do extra damage to them. You'll be able to do 10% more damage for each rank that they have. Although it might take a while for you to actually be able to get this trait active, since you need to acquire a kill on a legendary rank enemy. And you won't find those too often, especially not in the early game anyways. Lawbringer is also a pretty solid one, even though we're not a law-abiding character. Because if you clear a gold level infestation, you will get Pragmatic Leader, which will give you a reduction in upkeep and give you cold-blooded on all your guys, which makes it so that it's harder for them to lose morale. So really, the ones I think you should go for are Raider, Challenger, and Crusader. Duels can be fun too, though, if you want to be that kind of thematic. But I like to go with Raider. It's a pretty solid one. And then for your AI personality, do whatever you want. I went with Militant Warlord. So now let's go ahead and look at our units that the barbarians get from just the get-go, and then we'll cover each of our tomes to pick for this build. Moving on to our units, we'll be starting with our Pathfinder, which is the scout for the barbarians. At first glance, it might not seem very impressive, as most scouts are not. However, there are some unique features to this scout that other scouts don't have. Well, starting off, we have several different types of walking, which means it takes less movement to get through forests and mountains, as well as swamps. That's not super crazy, but the main thing that's really crazy is our ability to just straight up make outposts. Typically, this is reserved for heroes. The barbarians can use their scouts to build outposts and help spread those towns even quicker, which goes in tandem with our barbarian ability to heal from outposts. However, one thing to note is when you do make an outpost, your scout will have to sit still for the duration of making those outposts. That alone makes this probably one of the best scouts in the entire game, being able to get those outposts out there without having to invest into many heroes. Pretty friggin' sweet. Moving on to our first tier 1 unit, the Sunderer. Probably one of the best tier 1 units from any culture in the game, and is a relatively strong unit. It is a skirmisher unit, which means that it has a melee and a ranged attack. They are pretty squishy, but they deal pretty solid damage. One will always have Slippery and Swift, as all skirmishers have. But their melee is pretty strong. Without having the strong perk that we have from just being our trait here, we get 2 extra damage. Normally it would be 12, but it's 14 per hit with the strong. And then if we crit, we will get extra bite damage, and they just shred things. And as for their range attack, they can throw their javelin to inflict sunder defense, which lowers enemies' armor. Typically, you want a few of them together, or at least position them in a way so that they're standing next to somebody so they can get their overwhelm tactics bonus for that extra crit, and then throw the javelin to pepper your enemy and weaken them so that way you can have some of your other units get in there and do big chunks of damage, such as your hero or your other stronger units that we'll get to in a moment. It's a really solid unit, and you'll probably be using these throughout the entire game. Moving on to our other tier 1 unit, the Warrior. It is a shield unit, and it's actually a pretty solid tier 1 unit at that. It doesn't do as much damage as the Sunderers in melee, but it's a lot more durable, and it has an ability called Shield Bash, which has a 90% chance to become stunned. And that percentage does become lower every tier higher than a tier 1. So something to consider, but it's still really solid for a tier 1 unit to just simply stun a big bad or something that you don't want to move. Or you can also use it to position yourself. Like say you position this character next to a range attacker and there's a melee attacker next to it, stun that melee so that way you can just be there and be annoying. They also have the Savage Strike, just like our other units, but really this unit here is just to be annoying and stun things. Another thing to note after you use your Shield Bash, after you stun it, you'll immediately go into defensive mode. So you'll spread your defensive bonuses and immune to flanking to other allies in adjacent hexes. So it's pretty solid to at least have 1 or 2 of these in your entire army. You will probably end up phasing these out towards the mid game or when they eventually perish. If they perish, that is. Moving on to our tier 2. We will start off with our range attacker, our Fury, which is just a simple archer. There's nothing super crazy to write home about here. They can shoot bows, obviously. They will also have Frenzy on their attacks, which means every time they attack, they'll gain a stack of strengthen to increase their damage. Pretty solid and standard as far as archers go. And of course, if you really wanted to get their output out, definitely pick up things like Pyromancer or some other tomes that add to range damage. Pretty solid unit, but you'll probably phase these out really quickly. Moving on to our support unit from the Barbarians, the War Shaman. These units are just okay. On terms of the healing and support side of things, they're pretty mediocre at best. Their heal, which has a 3-turn cooldown, will heal all allies for 10 hit points and give them 1 stack of regeneration and strengthen in a 1 hex radius. So this is one of the shortcomings of the Barbarian culture. It's still on theme to, keep your enemies in the fight and such, but as far as just raw healing capabilities compared to other support units from other cultures, they are pretty lame. Eventually, you'll definitely be phasing these out really shortly, especially if you can get your hands on some nymphs, for example. Those are way better. Because one of the main downsides to the Barbarian culture is they don't really have ways to cleanse their statuses and debuffs. So the War Shaman just ain't it, unless you get some tomes that can amplify their support capabilities. But their basic attack is a chance to poison your enemies, which is just a little bit extra damage. Whoop-de-doo. And then moving on to our tier 3 units, the Berserkers. These guys are powerhouses, and if you fought against Barbarian cultures before, you can know that they are quite annoying. Why is that? Well, once you get them below 33% health, they have a passive called Berserker Rage. It will become Berserk, which will make it so that they attack anybody nearby. They will become immune to morale effects, and then if they have any casualties and such, which you will by being below 33%, you ignore the damage penalties for it. So you hit as if you're at 100% health. And you also get Steadfast, which makes it so you cannot die while this is active, basically. However, keep in mind that Steadfast can be dispelled. However, the AI is not usually smart enough to cast this on them before they keep smacking and throwing themselves at the Steadfast target. So versus AI, this is phenomenal. Versus players, be wary, because they could potentially dispel your Steadfast and you just lost your Berserker. Otherwise, they are pretty solid shock units. They do pretty strong attacks. They also have the Frenzy as well. So whenever they attack, they'll get strengthened to increase their damage. But yeah, they are pretty hard-hitting units. And that is the Barbarian units in a nutshell. So by picking up the Tome of the Horde, we will be getting our Houndmaster, which we can use to supplement our army. We can use these to actually phase out both our Furies and our Shield Warriors, because the Houndmaster will produce a unit with Unleash the Hounds. On land battles, anyways. They summon a Warhound that will inflict marked and sundered defense with its attack. And if you pick up the Tome of the Beast, you can pick up Animal Kinship, and then just pretty much have your Houndmaster fall around your hound. They'll be able to give each other 10% damage as well as 10% crit chance. And then one thing to note about the weak point shot from the Houndmaster is that they get bonus damage against marked targets, which the Hound will provide for them. Pretty good unit. They might not be able to hit multiple times like archers, however, they will do their full shot on their attack, and which is really cool because you can use these guys to flank around, especially them being mounted, so they can get around the battlefield quite well. It is a very, very good unit. Also, by going into the Tome of the Beast for Animal Kinship, you can pick up the Wild Seeker support units. They're not necessarily healers, but they do summon animals as well as buff them. And eventually, once you get your support abilities, they'll become a lot better. As far as how many you want of these guys, probably like 2 or 3 in your entire army. Most of the time, you'll be using a ton of Houndmasters in tandem with these. Anyways, we can conjure a random tier 1 animal that will last for 4 turns. It is only usable on once per battle. And then they also have an ability called Unleash the Beast. For 3 turns, target a friendly animal unit that will gain killing momentum and strengthen 2 stacks of strengthen to increase their damage by 20%. Killing momentum will allow them basically to get another free attack after they kill another target. Typically, you want to use this on either whatever your conjured animal is or the hounds from your Houndmaster. One thing to note is that they can only make an extra attack something that's next to them. So figure out a way to position your character on something that's weak with another enemy next to it so they can attack both targets. This unit is okay. It's a pretty solid support unit. You can, like I said, it can make your hounds a little bit better, and eventually, once you get your support abilities, this unit will become much stronger. Yeah, pretty solid unit. Only bring a couple of these because they don't have healing capabilities, unless you get the perks to get that from other tomes. So in your first tier of tomes, we want to be starting off with the Tome of the Horde, so we can pick up that Houndmaster unit, and then the abilities you're going to want to pick will be Summon Irregulars, Blaze of the Horde, and you'll start off by having Fury of the Horde, which is a decent ability. Otherwise, I really wouldn't use it too often if we didn't get it for free. If you do plan on going for a wide version of the build, meaning you're going to just have tons of units, Spawnkin is a really good feature to have. It'll just straight up increase all the damage of your units by 20% and give 10% evasion to your hero units, which is going to be really good. It also increases the number of units in your formation, so that way when you do take casualties, you'll still have pretty solid damage. But yeah, 20% damage is really good, just a flat bonus to everybody. It is incompatible with Super Growth, which is another transformation that you might consider for your build, which if you're going to go taller, makes them have much higher hit points as well as giving them an extra retaliation attack, which is pretty sweet, but due to the fact that you can really easily get rid of your retaliations by having other people charge you and whatnot, it might not be as valuable as Spawnkin. So really just pick whichever you feel like is for your flavor. For the Gruul clans, I feel like the Super Growth is more suiting. However, if you want to go for a more wide version of the build, then Spawnkin is really, really good. Not to mention that the Mob Camp is a really good way to enable your Forester-reliant buildings, because it does not require any other Foresters to get all these good benefits. And if you notice there, Tier 1 units will become cheaper by 20%, which is just another incentive to go wide on this build. Summon Irregulars is a really sweet spell to really help your momentum keep going and to keep units on the front line. You cast this and you'll be able to summon a random non-scout Tier 1 unit that can be produced in a city, which is pretty sweet, especially early on before you get anything else to clutter up your Tier 1 units. So you'll be summoning Sunderers and Warriors out on the front lines. As for our second tome, we want to pick up Tome of the Beast. Since we'll be using those Houndmasters to summon a bunch of hounds, we're going to want to use this tome to get Animal Kinship, which just simply gives all of our units 10% damage and 10% crit chance whenever they are standing next to an animal. And then animals the same thing when they stand next to non-animals. Really sweet. So what talents do we want from the Tome of the Beast besides Animal Kinship? Well, obviously, we're going to want to pick up the Wild Speaker at some point. It is a pretty solid unit, which we'll get into in a moment. So we'll want to pick up the Wild Speaker, which brings us to our Wild Speaker. Other talents you want to pick up is Summon Wild Animal, which is similar to the Summon Irregulars. Instead of spawning a random Tier 1 unit you can make in a building, you can make any Tier 1 animal. Not all of these Tier 1 animals are created equal, but an extra body is still an extra body in case of emergencies, or just keep that momentum going. The Marcus Prey ability is also pretty solid, makes enemies become distracted, so all of your attacks become flanking, and then it will apply 3 stacks of Sunder Defense. which is really good. And then the Wildlife Sanctuary province building is fantastic. It will also enable your forest-reliant buildings, but more importantly, it doesn't care about other foresters. All it cares about is provinces next to forests. It'll give you a pretty good amount of food and tons of draft for pretty much free if you have a really good starting location. And forests are really easy to come by, so oftentimes you'll have at least 4 to 6 increases to your draft here. Pretty damn good tome combination. Moving on to the tier 2 tomes, there aren't any real standouts for this build. There are plenty that work just fine, or you can supplement your tomes by going back and picking up tier 1 tomes that you really like for the playstyle. One of the new tomes from the Ways of War DLC gives us the Tome of Shades. It's a pretty decent tome, and if you can get it to work properly, you can do some devastating damage with your melee characters. With the Shadow Blades, whenever you attack anybody that's blinded, you'll just straight up ignore defense and resistance by 50%. You also get a pretty solid damaging spell called Rending Shadow, which is an AoE that will deal physical damage, and also have a high chance to blind the enemies, as well as lower their armor. Pretty damn good. You can also get the Living Shadow transformation, which is actually really good. It will give all of your units 10% more evasion, as well as giving them a chance to make enemies blind whenever they get attacked. Really good. This transformation alone is probably worth it, not to mention you get some little bonuses for the other enchantment from the Shadow Blades. The unit that comes along with this is the Shade. It's actually a pretty solid unit and works quite well with this entire build. It is a skirmisher, so it'll always have Slippery and Swift, meaning it can't get triggered opportunity attacks. Its Fatal Strike is similar to our Slayer Sword that we have on our main hero, which will deal increased damage based on its lost hit points. Pretty good. And then we have Throw Shadow Dagger, which is a range attack that could potentially blind your enemies, so you can combo that with your other melee characters. Overall, this is a pretty good tome, and you might be one that you consider for your build. Another reason I like to pick this one is to get one affinity of Materium and Shadow, so you can get some of those lovely bonuses that you wouldn't have otherwise. Notably, with the first tier of each of those respective trees. Since we're going to be a very aggressive and warlike civ, getting knowledge extraction from every hero we kill and getting that good boost of knowledge is a good way to supplement our knowledge, since we're going to be lacking that with our build. And then the military engineering will be an excellent way to get more outposts out from our scouts and from our heroes, so that we can either just have forward outposts to heal ourselves on the world map, or just to annoy our enemies, or just get ready to set up new towns, or just maybe that's a forward base that you want to set up, just so you can get some healing on nearby. Anyways, it's a really good thing to do. So being able to use this to get both of those 2 affinities as well is very beneficial for this build. However, if we want to stay on theme and just be, pure red and pure green, then I would highly consider the Tome of Fertility. This will provide us a few things that our main build is lacking, mostly with this one unit here from the Summoned Nymph. With the ability Revitalize, it's already a better heal, in my opinion, than the other heal that our Shaman gives us. That will give us 2 stacks of regeneration to everybody in a hex, but most importantly, it will remove every single negative status effect they have on them. And there are a lot of really debilitating negative effects, including debuffs and stuns and all kinds of nasty stuff. So the Nymphs here will be a good way to get rid of that. However, there are ways to get Nymphs throughout the game by conquering different wonders, as well as just getting them from random events. So if you happen to get a few of those Nymphs, like say you have 2 or 3 of them from some events or whatever, maybe you might consider skipping the Tome of Fertility. But it does offer a lot of healing and ways to get some more food and mana growth through their bountiful fields, which is a pretty sweet province building, considering it doesn't require any other farms, and it just requires grasslands and fungal fields. Don't have a lot of grasslands or fungal fields? Well, you can use Restore the Land to terraform things to get those features on those territories. And then we have a city structure here that we can get even more food and draft for our population. And we're going to be a really, really tall civilization. Even if you go wide, your cities are going to be massive. So Temple Fertility only adds on to that. And then the Animate Flora is just a nice little gimmick to turn either trees or shrubbery or bushes and such into these annoying little poison-spewing plants. And then we have another healing spell here to give everybody 3 stacks of regeneration in a 2 hex radius. So it's a pretty massive AoE regeneration. Pretty solid. So the Tome of Fertility might be something you would consider. Neither of these Chaos Tomes, in my opinion, really add stuff to it. It's some decent stuff. Tome of Mayhem can apply different debuffs and misfortune, which is it makes your enemies have a chance to fumble, which can be also kind of like an offensive, defensive ability, so to speak. But I'm not super impressed by the Tome of Mayhem for this build, anyways. When we get to Rakdos, we'll definitely be utilizing it. Same thing with the Tome of Revelry. It doesn't really resound to me for the Gruul build. It's all about getting a little bit extra damage and morale, which could be actually come into play since morale will give us more crit chance. And then we also just increase our physical damage as well. But really, all it is about is just increasing your morale. The Scald unit is an okay unit as well. Its basic attack has a chance to inflict insanity on your enemies, which will make them attack their allies if they have allies nearby. They have the Song of Carnage, which will buff everybody with a little bit extra crit and strengthened. And then as well as the Song of Revelry, which will rally everybody to increase their morale, as well as give them a little bit of regeneration. And then you get the Carnival of Flesh improvement. This increases your draft and food based on your farm. So you might consider this if you have a ton of farms in your region. Tome of Revelry, it's a good fit, but I don't think we get enough out of it to make me really want to spend a tome on this. As I mentioned, you don't need to pick up tier 2 tomes in order to advance to tier 3, so we could consider going back to our tier 1 tomes, and we could pick up a few other choices that we might have missed before, such as the Chaos Tome for Pyromancy to get the Searing Blades and Fiery Arrow enchantments that both add fire to your melee and ranged units respectively, as well as getting the Ritual Pyre Forester improvement that actually requires other Foresters, and it will give you a solid source of mana. So we're not going to have much sources of mana otherwise. And then the Ignite and Immolate spells are very solid. And then the units, the Pyromancer and the Lesser Magnosphere, are also pretty good too. Should the need arise for, say, if you are starting to fight a lot of enemies that are really defensive. So these can get around and help you provide some magic to your build, if you so desire. Another tier 1 tome you might actually consider is one of the newer tomes, the Tome of Discipline. Seems kind of odd for the Gruul, very out of character for them. However, it will provide a lot of good stuff for us here. Namely, with the Mantra of Purification to get a healing spell and a debuff cleanser, Empowered Strikes, so on our Sunderers and other melee characters that have multiple attacks, the third attack in the turn has a 6% chance to stun things, which is great. Also, the fact that we also get extra bonus damage there. And then we get a pretty solid unit in the Monk, which has Leap, so you can get closer to enemies to get that 3-strike combo. And then it has its own self-heal here. Pretty good. And then we get a Minor Transformation to give us even more healing received, so could make those regeneration buffs go a little bit, stretch a little further. And then we also get Status Resistance, which helps us just, resist a little bit of damage and negative effects. And then you get the Monastery, which is actually a pretty solid building. It is considered a conduit, which is kind of odd, and you could combo that with other things down the road. And then every farm nearby, you get some city stability as well as draft. Definitely something to consider. Another tome that you might consider that's very off character for the Gruul would be the Tome of Faith, which will provide you a ton of free healing that your army will severely lack in the Staves of Mending. So all those very mediocre support units we have, well, now we can give them the ability for Mending Touch, which is a free action to just heal somebody for 15 temporary hit points. So you can combo this with your Mending Touch to heal your most wounded person, and then use the whatever regeneration spell or any other spells you so desire right afterwards. So that alone is just enough for me to want to pick this tome, and everything else is just upside beyond that. We wouldn't really worry about Faithful Whispers, because most of the time we're just going to beat up all of our free cities, or beat them into submission. The Chaplain is actually a pretty solid healing character that you might want to consider grabbing. For the same reasons why you pick this one up in the first place. You get the Healing Prayer here, so that's a pretty solid heal, and it's a nice ranged heal as well. It'll also remove debuffs on your allies. And you also have another buff here to give somebody more crit, strengthen, and resistance, which is all things that your build would really like here. Furthermore, we can get the World Spell Army Heal to heal our armies that are maybe too far away from outposts, or just want to keep them pushing on a little bit harder and further. Then you also get Wrath of the Faithful, but I would not pick this up since we're not going to be a faithful build. And the Convent is actually a really good city structure, especially if you can keep your city stability in line. For every level you have above and stable, you can get 5 knowledge and 5 mana, which is going to be great because our knowledge generation is going to be pretty poor. And speaking of resource generation, we can get access to the Abbey, which is a really, really good province, especially if you have a lot of farms nearby. Just by itself, you get 10 knowledge, and then you get 3 knowledge for every farm nearby. And beyond that, you'll grant status protection at the start of the next combat to all friendly units in this hex. So say you have a bunch of nasty enemies coming at you, or you have an infestation nearby, you can put your main defending army on the spot to give them that little bonus here. These are all just a bunch of different choices that you could decide to pick for your build. Pick whatever you desire. And then for our other tier 3 tome we want to pick up is Tome of Vigor. This is a really good tome and really on theme for our animal side of things, especially with Gruul. And then we also get a few enchantments here, as well as some other good summoning spells. Starting off with Super Growth, this is if you did not go with the Spawnkin and you want to go taller, so to speak, you actually become really tall. You'll get extra hit points, more retaliation attacks, and then you'll have a decreased number of units in the formation, which means they'll have to deal more damage to you to make it so you get penalties from your units. So say, I don't know the whole calculation, but I think, so say you have like 4 Berserkers, you have Super Growth, now you have 3. So now they need to do 33% damage instead of 25 to make your unit a lot weaker, so to speak. So while Spawnkin does do 20% extra damage, they lose their percentage of their overall damage a lot quicker since they have a lot more entities. But Super Growth is pretty sweet, especially if you can really get those retaliation attacks. Just be wary though, it's really easy to cancel retaliation. So, and in the event that they can't, well, you're just doing extra damage, especially with those War Breeds and Berserkers. It's gonna be really nice. So speaking of other enhancements, we can also enhance all of our animals that we're going to have access to. With Empowered Beasts, we increase their damage by 20%, increase their health, and give them Demolisher, which is just, a little bit of icing on the cake. And also same thing with the Super Growth, it'll make it so that it's harder for them to lose their overall combat effectiveness. And as for summons, we have Summon Greater Animal, so very similar to our Tome of Beast version. We can be able to summon tier 3 animals, which are generally pretty strong. And then tier 4 animals are always generally good as well. We get an interesting combat ability here called Tome of the Wild, which is will only spawn some tier 1 animals, but really what you want to do is kind of throw this somewhere to like maybe do a choke point against the enemies. Like say there's like rocks and stuff, you want to put this in the way, or you might want to cast this behind the enemies so that we can kind of like get these animals into their backline to just disrupt them and prevent them from attacking, getting their full attacks, I should say, or their casting. Moving on to tier 4, this is where you can really decide what you want to do with your build. To be kind of on theme, you can go with Tome of the Demon Gate, although there aren't really too many demons in the Gruul thing. However, it is a really strong book nonetheless. You can transfer all your units into demons, which makes them fiend units, which gives them a little bit of fire resistance, but makes them weaker to frost and spirit resistance, but also gives them another 15% crit chance, and also gives them Desolate Walk, which allows them to move through a lot of those underground territories a lot easier. They also can get flying to make them be a lot more mobile. So can you just imagine a flying Warbreed coming down on you? Good luck. And then they'll get Frenzy on top of all the other buffs in case they didn't already have it. But honestly, I think the best part of the Tome of the Demon Gate is the Demonkin transformation, but you also get a Demon Gate province improvement, which will act as a teleporter to help get your units from your main cities onto the front lines. A really good province feature to have. And then I eventually went to tier 5 for Tome of Chaos Lord for our win condition. I didn't actually end up picking up any of this other stuff here. But getting a Summon Baylor is pretty solid. However, you need to sacrifice 2 population in order to make it. They are pretty good, damn good units. And you're going to have so much growth in your cities that they're going to be massive. So expanding 2 population might be worth it for you. Demonic Onslaught is pretty solid as well. Every unit in your army will get hastened, meaning they'll be able to get an additional retaliation attack and get a further movement to get up in front and smack people. And then they get killing momentum, potentially getting them an extra attack if they're next to other enemies. Pretty good. Otherwise, if you decide to go the nature route, the tier 5 Goddess of Nature is pretty decent as well. You get tons of healing with Mass Rejuvenation. You get Force of Nature to enchant all your units to get even more crit chance and blight damage. And then you get the Forest of Awareness to get vision on every single forest on the entire map. But really, these tier 5 tomes are just there for win conditions. Because by the time you get to the tier 3 and tier 4 tomes, the game's pretty much over at that point. So take it what you will. Now let's move on to the Empire talents to look out for. All right, so on the Empire screen, we're going to go over some of the skills that you might want to grab in your Empire tree. Some of them are must-haves and others are situational. Starting off with the Chaos tree, one of the first ones you get is the Call of Chaos, which is fantastic to really get your snowball rolling. Whenever you defeat an infestation, you grant you a unit based on the infestation defeated. Sometimes this can give you a tier 3, upwards of a tier 3, tier 4, or tier 5 unit, and you can go nuts. However, sometimes that can be a downside, as you might not have enough gold or mana to support it. Following that, we have Impressment, which is a decent one as well. I didn't go for it in this one because I wanted to spend my Imperium elsewhere. However, if you are really investing in a lot of tier 1 units, this is a no-brainer. Battlefield Looting is a fantastic one to help fund your warfare, as you gain gold from anything you killed, based on it. And then the higher the unit tier, the more you get. And it's really good to keep your gold flowing, especially after you clear all the resource nodes near you, as well as picking fights with free cities or enemy rival players. Skilled Raiders is an amazing skill. This will lower the time it takes to pillage things by one turn, and you get healed each time you do it, and you get more yields. Rite of the Chosen Warriors is an amazing skill as well, especially in the late game. So you have several cities queued with several combatants or soldiers that you're trying to get out. Pop this and you'll get it out almost immediately, and you can just really push the war effort forward. Some of these other ones are good as well. I just didn't pick them up because I spent my Imperium elsewhere. Before we move on to our nature side of things, I want to do quick shout-outs for some of the minor affinities I have. Since you're going to be in a lot of wars, if you do happen to pick up at least 1 or 2 shadow affinities early, you can pick up the Knowledge Extraction, which is phenomenal for gaining a lot of knowledge, especially since we're going to be lacking in that department with this build. Knowledge Extraction gives you 150 knowledge for every hero you defeat in combat. Getting more wars, getting all that stuff, and you'll find plenty of knowledge from killing heroes. Sometimes you can find heroes in some of the resource nodes you're going to, or even some of the Ancient Wonders. Another one to also to keep an eye out for, if you're able to manage to squeeze in a little bit of materium here or there, is picking up the military engineering so you can get your outposts out a little bit quicker. And also be able to convert them to cities quicker. Which ties into the nature side of things with the first talent, Fruitful Integration. Founding or absorbing cities costs 2 less turns, and newly founded or absorbed cities gain an additional population. If you're going to go really wide, this is a really great way to do it. Or just get that city up quicker before the AI steals that really juicy land from you. One of the best skills you can get from the nature tree right here is the Wild Expansion. Completing a province annexation, whenever you expand your territory from any of your cities, summons an animal under your control depending on the province. And sometimes you can get upwards of tier 4 units, and this is for free, mind you. These are really good as scouts or fodder, or sometimes to supplement your army. Obviously, the higher tier, typically the better they will be at combat. And it's just nice to get free sources of, more units to throw at your enemies. Works really well with the Tome of the Pack, since you can get a lot of animal surgeries with it. And it's also a way to weaponize your Imperium, so to speak, because you can spend Imperium to grow your cities immediately to expand and grab another province, and which will also net you another animal to help attack or defend stuff. Rite of Expansive Growth is it's a pretty solid rite. The more cities you have, the better it is, but even if you only have 2 or 3 cities, it's still pretty nice to just get instant population. Typically, you want to try to make sure you use it right after you got a population, or if there's way too many turns and you really want that next province now. Following that, Natural Order is going to be very good as well. Provinces with the Forest province feature. So as long as the terrain is forest, you'll get even more city stability. And at this point, your city is probably going to be massive. So any source of city stability is a good pick indeed. And then following that, because you have all these massive-ass cities, Rite of Awakening is amazing on top of that. For each province you own, you get 20 knowledge. This will be enough knowledge to knock out at least 2 or 3 knowledge, depending on how big your empire is. Alrighty, that is the Gruul Clans build. It's a pretty straightforward barbarian build that maximizes chaos and nature. Buff yourself up to high heavens and smash your enemies. Just be wary of all those magical attacks and such. You can thwart that through other means by just crushing them even quicker, or by wearing equipment or bringing spells that might help ward them off. But of course, choose whatever choices you think will suit the Gruul Clans to your liking, or to whatever way you prefer to play your game. These are just suggestions after all. But if you did like this video and this build, please like, comment, and subscribe for more builds like these. And I'll have another Ravnica build coming up very shortly. And until then, I'll see you in the next video. Farewell for now.